Now I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. Brian is HDR's Global Design Director based in Princeton and New York City. With 40 years experience, he has elevated HDR's commitment to design excellence and culture and pays special attention to the humanistic, organizational, and business issues of design to creatively balance the rational with the intuitive. Donald is HDR's design principal based in Toronto, Canada. With 30 years experience, he is known for his inventiveness and investment in placemaking, having led the design of the A+ award-winning Canadian Nuclear Laboratories new builds in Chalk River. Through his academic and studio leadership, he has established a legacy in Toronto's architecture culture. Adeline is HDR's Associate Design Principal based in Los Angeles. With 18 years experience, she brings a global perspective informed by time with Morphosis and Foster & Partners to HDR's education and science projects, including the furniture showroom-turned-laboratory for Cedars-Sinai in the iconic Pacific Design Center in West Hollywood. And finally, Lois is HDR's Global Interiors Director based in Chicago. With 25 years experience, she has led integrated global design teams at SOM, Google, NBBJ, and directed the delivery of complex precedent-setting projects. She collaborates across continents, leveraging her award-winning expertise into every facet of HDR's integrated design practice. And with that, I'll hand over the mic to you, Brian. What have you got in store for us today?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Paul. And that 40 kind of sticks in my head is kind of a little bit scary. So it's great kind of moving this ahead. And I guess the talk today is really about how we, HDR, a large global company, is designing meaningful building, and what we're going to talk about today really speaks about, first, who we are, what we stand for. Second is just, what are the challenges we face? I lead design at HDR, and there are challenges in large companies leading design and having meaningful work. Third is looking at the answers to that issue. We've thought through this, so we actually have a number of answers that we'll talk through in our projects. Some examples that we'll speak about that Paul mentioned, and then finally, the projects that each one of us will present. So that's the agenda. In thinking about how to start this, we try to understand, what is our brand? What are we trying to accomplish? We are a company with a long history. Who are we trying to be, and how are we trying to fit into the architectural community? And this kind of gives a good sense of not one of our design directors, but really who we are and how we're trying to project ourselves and integrate and trying to solve that issue I mentioned before. We're a really big global design company. We've got 225 offices worldwide. We've got 1,500 kind of architectural employees. We're 13,000 people strong. And when you think about that, beyond the fact that we're 100 years old, kind of headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska, we're a 100% employee-owned company, which means that 95% of our people own company stock. Why that's important is the vested interest in our success and everybody's livelihoods and our kind of future investments in terms of our retirement really matters on that, really matters. We also have a number of partners, business groups in our company that we collaborate with. Transportation is a large kind of piece of our business. We have a water group doing some amazing projects that really change the livelihood of how we use water worldwide. We have resources, we have engineering as part of architecture. And the issue is, how do they integrate together? What does that mean? And then thinking about that, we're a $3.1 billion company. And why I'm bringing that up is not to impress people. I'm also not trying to impress that we're a $676 million a year company. But going back to that idea of employee ownership, going back to the idea of how design plays a meaningful role to make that happen is part of what we're going to talk about today, about who we are. We believe that actually not just that design is important to do great design that's meaningful for people in the world, it's also important to think about how design plays a part in generating that business, enhancing that business, and building a brand that actually is competitive, and it's more competitive in the world than others. And we really take that to heart in how we work. We do about, of those 1,500 employees, we have thousands of projects every year. We have 5 major sectors, health being our largest sector. And we're actually the third largest architectural practice in the world. And those are factors that lead into how we deliver this meaningful design on a global scale, because that's a challenge. It's a challenge to be consistent. It's a challenge to have consistent people. It's a challenge to kind of look at that and review that from a global standpoint, because you can't just do a couple of projects to give you success. And Architizer, of course, is wonderful to win those awards, but it's also how do we deliver that on a large scale, so it's meaningful. And it really, you know, from my perspective, it comes down to, and kind of joining the company about 20 years ago, it was how do we build up and ramp up that design practice? And it really comes down to two components, and I'll talk about those that lead to the success. The first is, how do you get design as part of that business plan and make it be something that inspires everyone and built into that business? And the second is empowering the people that we have to do that work, not just hiring, but empowering people. You know, so we do that in a very simple way. And I think that this describes that. Our business is centrally led, and we have the greatest processes. You know, we are very successful from a financial standpoint, from a business standpoint. We're risk adverse, but our business is operations led, but our projects are design led. And I think it's a clear distinction to look at that as how we run our organization. You know, I have great partners in the business side that run ours and kind of lead us, but our projects are led from a design side, and I think that that's part of the trick. Who are we is an interesting way to look at this. You know, we're involved right now in a number of design competitions where we're competing against some of the cape architects of the world. You know, the people who wear different capes, and they're great architectural practices. How do we compete with that? We can't compete with that by trying to be them, because we can't be them. We're not the size, the scale, or singular led. Okay, we're also in very heavy competition with, I call it the letter companies, and you know who they are. There's lots of letter companies throughout the world, of companies that are led by lots of different people with their letters in the door who may not even be there anymore. So how do we take the H, the D, and the R, and what do we want to be in the center from a design company? And we want to be different. And I think we've set up a goal to have that difference be to our advantage. That advantage, I'm going to be very brief about this, but we have a great way to engage emerging talent in our company. We have something called Design Bootcamp. We have other methodologies that actually mentor and bring the younger design staff to come together to understand how to design, how to present, how to learn how to do what we do as a craft, not just a member of a team. And we do that on a global scale. It's really important to build that talent, and it works quite well. We also find that design sharing, that one of the challenges of having 45 plus studios throughout the world is, how do you know what everybody else is doing? How do you build on that? And we do this by actually, through an intranet site that basically internally, something called Studios, is in a real time being able to understand what everybody else is doing. It is something that we actually really encourage putting all projects on this site, so that you can learn from anybody else and share with other people throughout the company in a very strong way what's currently happening. I find that to be one of the greatest tools to really understand and learn and build on our success. So people are our greatest asset. Being able to build those people, being able to understand how to translate information. And then our philosophy is one that I call a working tool. It's not meant to be a manifest. It's not meant to say everything to all people. It's meant to say, how do we as design staff, what are the requirements for great design? And it breaks down to 5 simple points. One is that every project has to capture a bold idea. We always have to rethink. We never produce what we did before again. We need to rethink that and build on it. We need to express the fact that our projects are many times technology oriented, expressing that in how we integrate and express that. You'll see that, say, in a couple projects. We need to be good stewards. We use land, we use resources. How do we have a meaningful way to be good stewards of that in a sustainable way? And how do we embody that client's vision? Our design review process is built on this, and it's a way that's a tool to be used that ensures that the success lasts, you know. And now I'm going to talk about a couple of examples of that. The first is, you know, maybe you know or don't know this, but 10% of our energy throughout the world is given over to data centers to mine that data that's sitting on places and boxes on various locations. This data center in the Kowalchuk Data Center in Bergen, Norway, above the Arctic Circle, is to be located there because of a couple of reasons. That's all energy based, but it also is in and amongst the location of the Sami people of northern Lapland, who actually have a history of what's called a gamma, where they historically have lived and still have built a number of facilities like this. How do you put a data center in this location? How do you put a data center in a location that actually generates through the water that's there, a greatest location for the data center, but think about it as architecture. Think about it as an idea. The notion here was to think about that nature of where it is as a series of modules that take its cues from the landscape that surrounds it, and being able to think about that as a kind of a generator of form. It starts to look at these modules of data center functionality, expressing those in ways that we call the data gamma, which is the idea of creating imagery that's built on a Sami kind of background in a way that becomes part and one in the landscape. And then next to here, Bergen's about an 800-person community, being able to understand, okay, how that community is served by a kind of a community center built alongside the data center that creates a meaningful environment for the idea of the local community, for the idea of its location in a unique way. The Kiowa Luminarium is simply an idea to illuminate learning in Omaha, Nebraska, a different location, being able to think about the imagery of that and think about how this works in a simple fashion. Our idea was to understand how to illuminate in a sense of a kind of historic shed, a kind of a shed idea that's translated into a new, a kind of form that generates illumination to the community. And then thinking about how to generate fun, because in the end, it's about joy and it's about fun, and it's about being able to describe that in the inside of the building, being able to understand how to use that simple architectural geometry that's based on the historic notion of a shed kind of architecture to actually teach and to create joy for students, young, old, at all times. And I think it's the idea that drives that. MD Anderson, Let the Sun Shine In. It's a kind of a fascinating project in a site for 3 million square feet. This is the campus in Houston of the medical center. That one green plot of land in the middle, okay, of that site is where 3 million feet is meant to be spent. And the simple idea here was really based on the power of healing, of nature, of keeping that park. Simple idea. Healing can help cancer patients. Being able to kind of have that generate this green corridor that starts to create a sensibility of how to organize this building and being able to see through versus walking into a hospital and seeing a wall with a logo, and being able to have that be something that actually starts to express itself, not only in its vertical form in this location right here, but a modularity that really gives us clues of technically how to give flexibility to a hospital and have something that still creates that green space for radiation oncology and throughout the health environment. I think that the notion of this and thinking about how to connect floors between modalities of cancer treatment starts to also treat the building as a generator of form for how it expresses itself to the world. There's over 1 million patients a year who use this. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about the Salk Institute. It's a competition we won a couple of years ago that looks to the idea of being able to say, how do you place a building in front of a building that is so iconic, you kind of are nervous about what to do with Jonas Salk and Lucan. And the sense of this is looking at a book written by Jonas and his son about a new reality of how the evolution of a campus that we all know that generates science to get to this kind of waterway that gives to the earth. How do you look at that in a different way? So our building looks at the idea of being able to think about that axis that's so important, but create a cross-axis that starts to connect science together to be able to create new ideas to give to the world. Having that be something that's respectful, okay, obviously of the Salk Institute, but be able to do it in a way, see a little spot at the ceiling, so do that in a way that rather than having this spot of water on the ground that leads to the Pacific, have a spot of light that brings light in to generate inspiration to those scientists in the building, and be able to think about that as a new entry that's a companion to the Salk Institute in a kind of a way that is simple, but I think elegant in how it services, and then how you look back at this from Salk and understand that connectivity that builds a campus in that location. So now we're going to talk about 3 projects. We've broken these down into 3 groupings. You know, the idea of purpose and the idea of a building that has a purpose to it, that has meaning, and is directional in its thought. The second is looking at repurpose and what can we learn about change of facilities and how that changes over time to generate ideas. And the third idea here is to reimagine something, to have an idea that is not only based on its own, but starts to relate to other opportunities to reimagine, in this case, what a hospital might be in a community and how that may change the way things work. And so I'm going to start off by saying that the project we've talked about, purpose, Don will speak about. And the purpose here, and I was amazed by this photo, Don, that you took, it's what do you place for the Canadian Nuclear Laboratory, way up in kind of the Chalk River, Ontario, Canada, that the environment and what it feels like, okay, looks like this. And what do you do in an environment like this that before was about, you know, buildings placed in a campus? How do you change that and how do you improve on that? And Don's going to speak a little bit about that.
Great. Thanks very much, Brian, for setting that up wonderfully. And also thank you to Paul and the group for this opportunity to share this. I just want to kind of pick up on some of the great things that Brian was saying is things like the studios and that kind of culture. And when we have things like purpose, this image here was actually the trip from, you'll see momentarily, where we were looking at some material opportunities for this open kind of green space a couple hours north of Ottawa. And I think this image here is what you'll see in a little bit, the image to Quebec from Ontario down this river valley. And we had this opportunity, and I like to say through HDR, to be able to kind of put that studio culture, that way of thinking, as Brian was touching on, to start to seek the kind of purpose that CNL, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, had, a federally run agency trying to innovate, trying to do the right thing, and looking maybe for that kind of match. And maybe we had that. Kind of stepping out, zooming out, you see the boreal forest map of trees, and also I'm located in just a tip of Lake Ontario there, and just north of that a little bit, and way up on the Canadian Shield in the river valley was that view that Brian just showed here. And it's important for us to see this because we have in the range of HDR the kinds of projects that allow us to say, can we maybe look at this creatively? And the opportunity to be able to see right from one day to go to Quebec to look at the black spruce forest, to understand the province and way these things were cultivated and harvested and how they're planted and what it meant to understand the best prime cuts of the grain. These are the things that we got to do in a studio kind of mentality because HDR allowed us, in the framework of HDR, we got the opportunity to be entrusted to look at these things and to understand things like the lamella and the best ways to understand the process of how a kind of a new emerging industry that we're all starting to hear about, mass timber, how that could maybe become part of what we do. And I don't think it could have happened without us trying to investigate like a studio. These are some of the images which you'll see a little bit later, but just to kind of tell you the next day, driving up that same road in the open space to a campus that is, if you squint, a little bit like an academic campus, but for science and technology, in which they're trying to understand how can you create quality spaces that still allow people to think freely, to exchange ideas, to collaborate in science, and to even do things that are meaningful. I'm a Canadian, that's me, I'm a goalie. I just showed this more to kind of get a positioning on where we are geographically, culturally too, but also just as a segue to say, we all have a relationship with wood. And this story that I want to show very briefly here is we have this kind of connection that we all ought to, as designers, as architects, understand, even with a baseball bat or a hockey stick, the grain, that the impact of the grain on end with the labels up, that the baseball just on contact has better flight. It's those moments of what we didn't know we always knew. My Japanese saw of my Korean grandfather's pull saw to rip the grain. It just kind of makes you think again. these tools, and also the settings in which I got a chance, which is so great to nest it at HDR, having got a chance with the Rome Prize, my travels to Kyoto to see different sort of places and spaces of how wood was really much a part of it. And maybe it's just something that we ought to be doing again to really understand these opportunities. And I think even as a child, as you see there, my son, we know these things. We learned this in school, the tree rings, the annual growth, but also the fiber within it. And I don't have to tell this audience how important it is to see those opportunities of the actual the way that we can maybe sequester carbon in this amazing organism, trees, that is really our kind of partners that we're sort of inhabiting this earth together. Maybe there's opportunities from Silverstein storybooks on giving trees and what can we give back to Giuseppe Pannoni, and understanding really where our lumber might be coming from if you start to look at it. Where are we? And when we start to look at these kinds of ideas of understanding the cut plans and the regionalism and the histories of what this material is, and then looking at things in this opportunity to go to Denmark and look at vessels and tools that we connect with, ought we not start to really investigate again? Is this really new? But to try to understand the grain and the technique, whether furniture like Hans Wegner or Alvar Aalto finger jointing, those moments just seem to be right for us. And historically in Canada, there's a tradition of the way it connected us through grain elevators or railway lines, and even far earlier than that, the indigenous population. And how do we, a little bit like the way Brian was showing, how do these ideas connect to the landscape and the peoples before us? I think it's interesting, this might date me, but the dollar bill, not in currency anymore, on the backside in Canada had the Ottawa River Valley with the city government behind it, as if to suggest it might support this notion of the wood industry, which is exactly where the CNL campus is. And maybe there was an opportunity for CNL to reimagine, repurpose, or have some purpose in what they want to do about trying to do a project that can actually demonstrate things. And a quick sort of run of my own background of studying in Switzerland and teaching and understanding that structure is really a big part of the systems that we want to craft. And whether it's your concept or Robert Maillard, understanding emergent technologies and structural ideas, even if they might have been helped and propped up quite literally by timber, what are these things that we even see folks like Auguste Perret doing when he leaps out in front? Le Corbusier makes sure he wants to be near the kind of idea that, if not people like us designers, people that have the opportunity or the expertise, the shared knowledge to look at new techniques that might usher us into a new century, maybe even remind us of good ways and techniques to do things that might seem simple but are bold. And I wonder, when we start to think of these things, we do get a lot of interest, which is great, to have the various federal agencies to come to us, to ask us to help be jurors, but also participants, because it's greater than just the footprint. What are we doing as a field to try to empower people to think this way? Maybe because not just that we want to, but we need to. The library of the studio might have these things around us. And I think it kind of helped us to understand, that really would kind of concurrently to a process of a studio that is new, kind of forces us to think of the narrative and the values and the provenance, that kind of backstory. And it's so interesting, at whatever skill you're at, if you think like a studio, but you have a framework like what we have at HDR, it kind of works well when we're also looking at new things. We had this kind of unicorn project where we're looking at mass timber that was actually proven to work through understanding IPD. We were starting to understand the value of things. We worked together. It felt a whole lot like the studio of smaller projects because you're with the owners, the trades, the engineers, and real time making choices that have value and generational thinking, systems thinking. And I think this notion of understanding and helping kind of co-write, frankly, the narrative, designing the science of tomorrow on this campus, a beautiful setting. People at CNL knew that they wanted to be transformative in their new campus. They kind of came from the Oppenheimer era, where there's a lot of pride in understanding new techniques, and there's a lot of holy grails in what they want to do for cleaner energy. And I think in that context, they felt it was just so important to say, okay, let's walk that walk. And in doing so, this is once called an innovations hub, but now it's really the collaboration Science Collaboration Center. The upper floors are a very robust and open chassis, if you will, of a studio framework. Kind of pre-COVID, that thinking was an idea. It really works post-COVID, and also a mixed-use kind of building, one that can actually have an auditorium, health center, exchanging ideas in conference places, and even IT data center. Those kinds of things meant a lot. We looked at these things concurrently at a time where we were trying to run 3 projects at once. They felt it was important to do this together. And of course, when you step back, there's a lot of stories to making sure these things work. But through IPD and trying to understand at a studio level, a research level, this was important to come out with, to map out not just the proverbial seats and butts and how much area we could kind of be really good on, but the volume of the material, in this case wood, and maybe even that kind of carbon pro forma, to map it out and see what we could do. That just seems to be an exciting space to be crafting as well. And that kind of leveraged us to then look at the project to understand sizing, spans, sizes of windows, and also even the workforce and what they need to have per square feet. And to understand, back to those images we showed, how those lamellas could offer ways to maybe mill and get systems inboard. And to do that, to create this kind of instrument of the building, a social instrument, but one that could kind of be resilient to the flux of use. Why wouldn't we want to try to create those kind of typologies, especially when the material structure can help us see these opportunities? And I think that was one of the things that helped us in an atelier studio mindset, that HDR with shared knowledge gets us a chance to look at things. And I think this project then, while it gave us a chance to real-time draw these kinds of details, to find and mine for those opportunities, it got us a chance to look at these kinds of spaces and then to build it in the first few. This is the first project, the main project, but it learned from the other projects that were the 2 smaller ones, kind of a testing ground for the way we ran it, the way it logistically ran, how we could integrate the craft of the experience of wood detailing at a finer level, but also at a level that could work across logistics buildings or entry buildings. And it really meant a lot to the campus to see that they just felt that there was that kind of experience that they felt was a working kind of tool that they then suddenly felt that much more pride in the way they worked. We studied it, the process, right through to the end. And we wanted to try to ensure that we built this kind of project that could last. And that was something that we felt was resilient to the way things might change. We understand that, kind of planning for the unplanned. And I think as we got to understand the building more and the way it flowed through with the kind of the public social condition, it felt like that this type of space, this mixed use space, was one that really met their interests. We'd like to think that we want to give people everything they didn't know they always wanted. And I'd like to think that this project showed that. And I think for us at HDR, when we get to do and think this way as a studio that's far reaching and hopefully lasting, maybe this is a sign of the future that we hope we can build together and maybe lead other architects into thinking this way. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate that. And you can hear the purpose in his heart and his mind. It's fantastic. And I think the idea of repurpose, and Adeline is going to speak about this, but it really is about the idea of a building kind of outside LA, West Hollywood, Pacific Design Center, very iconic, again, series of buildings done for a purpose. And then the repurposing of that purpose in a way to be something different. So Adeline, if you want to take it over.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So I want to add repurpose and saving life. Like this is even crunchier story to me. So West Hollywood is this little neighborhood west of Los Angeles. It is the hot place when it comes to fashion, to food, to cultural event, to music. It is also the home of the Pacific Design Center that you have in the center of this picture. It's a César Pelli project designed in the early 70s, built in 3 phases. It's a large campus. You see, it's the blue building was built first, green followed, and then the red one in the late 80s. It was initially designed to host fashion events and host the largest collection of furniture showroom on the West Coast. It was the place to be at its inception. Unfortunately, roughly 15 years ago, people start moving out of the space. It finds other trendy neighborhood or in LA or other platform online, which turned the Pacific Center in kind of a very unoccupied space. A mile away from the Pacific Center, like kind of right of this image, is Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. It is one of the top 5 hospitals in the US, and they find themselves in an opposite situation where West Hollywood is actually very low in density, but very packed. The medical center couldn't expand their research department, so they approached Pacific Design Center and then checked if there was any way that they could find a compromise there. The Pacific Design Center was definitely not designed to host a laboratory. Don's presentation is very much about how he tied himself to its context, to its large environment, to expanding that campus. Ours is very much a within problem, very much like looking at our belly button, looking at our program, looking at our users. This is actually a picture that our client shared with us. This is a stem cell imagery. This is the starting point of what our researchers are working on. They actually isolate stem cells of their patients. They test special therapies to help recover from life-threatening disease. This is their starting point. This was also our starting point for our design. This is our suite. This is a 26,000 square feet little suite on the second floor of that blue building that I was showing you. Our 4 sides are pretty much blank walls. We have very limited vision to the outside. The blue arrows show you the little windows that we have that kind of show the world that there is maybe a little lab inside, but who knows what it is inside. The other side is that little orange arrow. It's 25 feet of storefront. And that immediately connects you to a public corridor where other little showrooms live. The little shape right of that arrows with the 2 columns is actually a fancy vase showroom. There is no natural light. There is public walking. At that time in 2017, not that much people were hanging around there, but it is a public accessible space. This is our suite as it was in 2017. The light that you see on the left is that little bit of natural light that we have. At the back, that little light right there, right of this is actually that connection to that showroom kind of side. It might look generous in terms of space if you were to think, let's put a nice little office in there, except that labs need a lot of space. Labs have this specialty of being kind of a power beast and a space beast, especially like in our case, we had to design a clean room class 4, which comes with a lot of very technical things that I won't expand, but it needs a lot of space. It needs a lot of air exchange. So that means a lot of duct. This is expressed in here in orange. Our suite is located on the 2nd floor. To make this power beast run, you need a lot of mechanical space. There is no place on the ground. As I told you, West Hollywood is completely packed. We had to go up. We had to maze 3 through 5 floors of active showrooms to find our way to that top floor. Once we got there, we had to meet with the city and find an agreeable expression of that, because as I said, it's an iconic landmark. Obviously, everybody is very anxious of how that lab get translated, since we were not very visible in terms of like that outer skin at our 2nd floor. Our top floor, on the other hand, was very present. We had to push that mechanical space as far as possible. We had to push those exhaust stacks to make everybody happy and wrap it up with a skin that matched the original design. How does that get translated within? We created this central spine that connects those 2 moments of like those 2 little tension points. As I said, there is that natural light that comes from one side. There is that showroom light that comes from the other side. We created that tension. We created that corridor, and we created this triangulated wall system that carries a concealed light and that helps wayfinding, that helps guiding the eyes through the suite. Something that was very important to our client is that their incredible advance in their research is very much dependent on how much money do they receive from their donors. This was very much key in how we designed this space. We knew that it has to be a dance to make sure donors walk the suite, see the science on display, see the incredible work that is done, and see how they're going to be changing so many lives. So there is this carrying the light, but there is also and a second layer to that, which is kind of echoing that little image that I show you about those stem cells. We increase the size of it, we change the color, we stretch it as big as we can, and we use that imagery at a very specific point in the suite. We use it at the reception, we use it at the entrance of the clean room, which is where the magic happened, and we use it in the break room for the few researchers that work there. This is another little component that get plugged. There is a lot of conference space and work space. These are some of the labs. I told you there is very limited natural light. There's a very compressed kind of environment. It was very key for us to open as much as possible. As I told you, there is those donors, there is those users that work here. Not only we want to show what they're doing, but we want them to be very safe. So this is where we use that mini glass. You see that layer, you see the foreground being this lab, the circulation, that corridor that I mentioned, and then the second layer of labs on the other side. That little diagram shows you that tension between the reception and that collaboration. We have a lot of other little components that can get plugged around it. How does that get translated to the furniture showroom? This is that 24 feet of storefront that we had. This is the only moment where we say we are a lab, but we are in a lab surrounded with furniture showroom. Back in 2017, as I said, we were the only one, a neighbor with that very fancy vase, inaccessible shop. We had to be neighbor with that. We had to know that we had no control about who would move next to us. This is the only moment we marry that kind of different use of that space. That wall, triangulated wall concealing that light. This is the light that comes from those little windows in the very back of the suite. That graphic there, it says we are a medical research facility. Just like our researchers were crafting those therapies to their patient, we were crafting that wall. As I said, we're using it to articulate that dance, that path within that corridor is doing different things. We went as random as we could with the size of those panels, with how they kind of extract in and out, and how they frame something we wanted to see. Generally speaking, I am in love with labs, but not all labs equipment are glamorous to see. So this is where that wall was doing a magic with just guiding that eye to see the right angle. The CBC lab in orange right here was the #1 lab that we did with Cedars-Sinai, and we cracked all of those very technical challenges there. Very quickly after, Cedars-Sinai came back to us and expanded to the MAST lab at the bottom of the green building. Shortly after, we expanded to do the innovation lab. We are currently working on the 2 and the gray ends that says future. We are designing that right now. At the completion of this last lab, the second floor of that PDC, of that Pacific Design Center, will be 99% medical research, at the exception of that vase shop. This means that next time you are in LA, you go to the Pacific Design Center, you reach the second floor, and this is where you see incredible medical research and life-saving therapy happening live in front of you. This is how I'm going to conclude this one. This is a very dear to my heart. This was published a few months ago because Versace decided to do their fashion show at the Los Angeles Fashion Week last year on the top of the parking structure in front of our building, which makes our background, our little lab, and now that you know that it's there, our mechanical space, the backdrop of this fashion show. This is the moment for us that kind of marry what we love so much, which is that fashion, life-changing, pushing medicine, being part of all of those beautiful things. And this is all the same story. This is all captured within that picture. Thank you.
Wow, that's cool. That's good. That's good, Ellen. Thank you. I mean, the idea of fashion becomes research, but actually research is fashion, right? It's kind of a cool way to look at this. I mean, the idea of reimagining kind of grows on the purpose and repurpose. And I'll just start this out by showing a photograph here of kind of a hospital that Henry Ford built for his workers, basically in Detroit, Michigan, about 100 and so years ago, 115 years ago. The importance of this is that actually we're asked to look at how we might do a new hospital, okay, that may transform health for Henry Ford. So they could have went off campus and went to the suburban areas to build a new Henry Ford Hospital. The issue here is, though, how could we use something that actually is a place in Detroit, a place not only for itself, but it's been transformed into serving the communities that surround this, that has changed since kind of being a kind of motor city town to serving the communities. And how do we engage the idea of creating a way to re-enliven a city, to rethink about just the hospitals becoming something much more than a hospital, and actually have it re-enliven the idea of this area. And now Lois is going to speak a little bit about that, about how we accomplish that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Brian. And so as you mentioned, something really amazing happened here about 100 plus years ago. And it is really for us that opportunity to reimagine how health is delivered in Detroit. And this project profile is a little bit different because our thinking really started before we actually had the project and during the pursuit. And it seemed like Detroit, we really wanted to dig in and understand it. And it goes without saying, I think, that it is a city of very big personality, and you can sense it and see it, that personality, the spirit and the energy, and the contrasts, the old and the new, the grit and the grace, and the past and the present are always part of what you sense in Detroit. And to bring that spirit like a tapestry, if you will, weaving architecture and fashion. Who knew there would be that common thread through all these projects? But it's a real thing, and more so as well the idea of industry and craftsmanship and creativity that are so very much about Detroit, and that culture and community that are just so much ever present, always around Detroit. And the pride, the idea that made in Detroit, and that's everything from Ford to music to food, etc. It's all there. And what's interesting is over the years, some people may have actually asked, what happened to Detroit? What changed? What happened? And the reality is that it's always been there. It's been there all along, and its spirit, energy, its big personality, ever present. And so this was the backdrop that the team worked with to develop the pursuit, and the pursuit of the Henry Ford Health Hospital. So reimagining the possibilities is what we really anchored on. And certainly capturing the energy of Detroit was essential and imperative. And that there's something about Henry, there's always been something about Henry, and we felt it and we sensed it. We also acknowledged that it's definitely about the markets and the food and the music, and also the spirit of the streets and the brick and the beauty of really everyday things that are ever present in Detroit. And then there's the nicknames, Motor City, Motown, the Big D. All of these things came into play as we were thinking about how do we engage a client and get really excited about the potential of a reimagining. And it really came back to that idea, and the client was truly enthusiastic about it. And Detroit really never left. So Henry Ford Health could have selected an urban site a suburban site, and rather they chose to site the hospital on the south section of the property across from the historic hospital. Very urban. There's 6 adjacent neighborhoods with really unique museums and churches and places of worship, and also important destinations and places that house many. And so as we looked at the project in the early phases, the team developed 2 really primary themes. And that was one of creating meaningful connections to the communities. And the second was to create a park, which is now called Henry Square. And in doing so, the park becomes a beacon to everyone. Instead of driving past that park every day, It encourages the communities to stop, come in and enjoy, and return often. And the park creates synergies between the existing hospital to the north and the proposed new hospital to the south. If you would think about it as looking to the past, learning from the past and looking to the future. As we considered the building, the podium of the new hospital is long and low, connecting to the existing proportions of the hospital to the north, and making it similar in scale to the neighborhoods that are adjacent. And looking to the future, the bed tower is tall. It is a glass beacon. It steps away from the past and brings the spirit and the energy and the possibilities of the future. Our team is a multidisciplinary team working in a very interdisciplinary way. We really considered this building from the inside out and the outside in. Transparency and views were prioritized. Approaching the building, the public spaces are visible, welcoming and providing clarity, almost legibility, if you will, for what's going on inside. And in delivering the concept of transparency, one can almost feel that the park flows into the building, and in fact, also that the building flows out into the park. As one takes the elevators up in that bed tower and arrives at the lobbies on each floor, there are views to the city and the park and the historic hospital, often, depending on where you are, sometimes all three of them, and certainly from all the rooms. Those lobbies are also quiet places for families and visitors to contemplate, find a quiet space to collect themselves and consider what all that's going on around them and enjoy that connectivity to Detroit. Inside, the public spaces draw upon that Detroit, the legacy of the architecture and the craftsmanship and a culture of design that is so ever present in Detroit. And then blending the details of the past with a more modern, refined simplicity. As you move through those public spaces, mention the continuous connection to outside, which was absolutely imperative to us, that the views to outside were considered throughout, and even in the spaces that the people that work at the hospital each day, views were very much considered in our planning and our approach. And really celebrating the energy and the spirit of the people that come to the hospital each day is and was very much central to our concepts and our ideas and the ways in which we designed the spaces throughout the hospital. Early on, the team with the client developed 5 drivers, and those project drivers, were drivers of success, if you will. And in fact, they came to help guide decision-making. They continue to, and they've also become a measure of how we look at the success of the project. And so, as I mentioned at the outset, something really amazing happened here 100 years ago. And 100 years later, something amazing is happening again. And it's the opportunity, and it is our responsibility. So Brian, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lois. And I just want to end by saying we started talking about who we were, what we're about, how we do what we do, and show you some examples. So we'd love to open this up for questions. I know we're a little bit over here, Paul, so I'll turn it back to you and just have you kind of shepherd those questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all of you. This was an incredible journey through some really technically advanced projects, but explained in such an accessible and easy to understand way. Really appreciated that. And one of the top questions that we had, which I think is really kind of an interesting one because it was asked before the projects were presented. So it was asked while Brian was introducing, which was from Juan. How do you, I guess, as a global firm, how do you maintain design consistency around the world? And I think it was interesting because your projects then were so diverse and so varied in their approach. So I guess the question is, how do you maintain design consistency, or do you try to maintain any kind of consistency?
That's kind of it.
It's a big question, but yeah, I'd be very curious to know your thoughts on that.
I'll be glad to answer that, because I think the projects are not consistent. Okay, the quality of what we do is very much based on the consistency of the design philosophy that I kind of laid out, and then being able to I'm not sure what happened to the screen here, but I'll keep on going. It's the idea of being able to build the sense of camaraderie between those studios, and being able to build the consistency amongst the 5 pieces of our design philosophy, and reinforcing that in design reviews. So it gives latitude for us to do kind of inspired design in different ways, in different cultures, in different typologies. But in the end, it's always about having that success that isn't based on a theme, or isn't based on repeating ideas. It's based on kind of growing that culture and growing the ideas for people to study new ways of doing things.
If I could add to that, I think that was a really great word, the latitude. So there's that part of that word of there's some tolerance to the way we do things. But if I take that word also, I was thinking of there's the lateral kind of dialogue that we can have. And I think if there's any consistency, I think you're right, the camaraderie and the idea that we could maybe in some ways a studio has its own personality, but there's a core way of exchange and understanding. And I think that way we have a certain equity of learning and building off of one another.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I also just wanted to congratulate you on your recent A+ Awards successes, especially for the CNL, beautiful CNL building. And yeah, just curious, why do you enter these awards, and what kind of benefits do you see for your firm when you are able to secure an accolade?
Yeah, maybe I'll just answer that. Thanks, Paul, and others just jump in. I think it's nice to see the backdrop that you had there. Mm-hmm. I think maybe it's just an innate sort of desire for us as designers and architects to want to tell the story and share it. And I think that's fundamentally, I like to think even historically, awards programs are trying at their best, at the truest, to just convey those stories and those ideas, those essential narratives that I think a lot of us talk about today. And if you do it through some level of, I guess, recognition, that's fantastic, but just really to get it out there. And I think that's a driver, really. I don't know if others would agree, but that seems to be something that I think is built into what we do.
If I can add to this, I think there is something, to me at least, that I feel very deeply every time I enter this program, Paul. It's I am the steward of our clients' success. I feel very much invested in having to tell their story, obviously by the high quality of design that we deliver, but this wouldn't work if we didn't have them. And so I think, to me, there is very much that is just like telling that story out. That CBC project that I just told the story, this is incredible what they're doing. I want all of you, I challenge all of you to come to LA and just walk that second floor and get to see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our projects really are a sum total of their stories. They're, I think, with the variety of projects we looked at, they're really a product of the place and the time that they're in, but also the idea of the innovation, that instead of doing things the same all the time, is the innovation that we bring to them in perhaps subtle ways, but also very bold ways. And to have people see that and understand it and want to recognize it, I think it's a great honor in the industry of colleagues to be recognized in that way, and so that someone sees that is part of that story that we weave as we create these phenomenal spaces that people come to every day and experience.
And Paul, you mentioned kind of how we feel about the awards at Architizer, and I think there's a difference in getting validation from others, okay, for what you're doing, beyond responding to what we think is great design. I think any award goes that way, but architecture is kind of interesting in that it's an open platform. It's something it's a bit more. I spoke early on about where we sit as a company, and I think the ability about being able to enter the open platform and get that feedback in real time in a way kind of fits the imagery of what we see as a company and how we want to apply ourselves. So it kind of matches that place where we see ourselves being as a company.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and from our perspective, it's it's our lifeblood. It enables us to give you a platform. We tell stories from an editorial perspective the best we can, but what's even better than that is when you can tell your own story as architects, which I think all of you have done such a wonderful job of today. So I don't know about everybody watching, but I'm super inspired. So I can't wait to learn more about the next projects coming up from HDR. Unfortunately, we're right out of time, but I just want to thank everyone on our panel for wonderful presentations. And just invite everybody before you go to respond to the poll. If you'd like to follow in HDR's footsteps and participate in the A+ Awards this year, make sure you answer that poll before you leave. Hopefully, if you have a little more time in your day, I'm hosting another talk in 1 hour's time with practice of architecture and urbanism. So I'm really looking forward to that one. Until next time, we'll have to do this again, everyone. Thank you so much again. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks so much, Paul.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye now. Take care.
Bye for now.